All right, here we go. Game 7, Darren Dreger, Ray and Dregs podcast, TSN. Obviously, Dregs, there's nothing like it. Like we were saying today, like this is just the 12th time in the history of the Oilers there's been a Game 7. So, of course, we're going to be on today. And I don't know how much stock you put into anything that's happened so far in the series when you got a winner-take-all game like tonight.
No, and look, I mean, it's overused, but it does set up to be one for the ages from a Canadian perspective, right? I mean, you've got a great rivalry between Vancouver and Edmonton. Hey, Ferrero on the Ray and Dregs podcast and in other outlets, I mean, picked Edmonton to win this series in 6. You can imagine how that went over in his household with Cameron Granato, of course, who's an assistant general manager with the Vancouver Canucks. But, it's had a little bit of everything. It certainly has had the star power, right? It's had secondary scoring. It's had some intrigue in the crease, both the Vancouver Canucks and the Edmonton Oilers. And I felt like in Game 6, the Oilers almost beat the Vancouver Canucks at their own game. Yeah. Edmonton was terrific defensively. Stu Skinner, lots of questions with him getting the start. A real ballsy call, I would say, by Chris Knoblauch to go that direction. But he made the saves that he had to make. So what does Game 7 set up like? Who knows? Aside from, big kick in the shins, knowing that Brock Besser doesn't appear to be available to the Vancouver Canucks, a point-per-game player going into Game 7 tonight. But it's still going to be a hostile environment on home ice. So whether or not that it gives any sort of advantage to the Canucks, we'll see how it plays out.
Well, Darren, we were going to go there. That is kind of the story developing with Besser not being able to participate. From a Canucks and Oilers point of view, I mean, where does Vancouver kind of go from there? Where would you go from there and tinkering with that lineup? And how would you see kind of the Oilers really getting after this and exploiting it to the best of their measure?
Well, I don't think that the Oilers can exploit it or worry too much about it. I think that Edmonton has to look at the game that they executed in Game 6. I mean, the focus going into Game 6 was speed and intensity and get to that Vancouver defense as best as they could. And they did that. I mean, Dylan Holloway puts the Oilers on the board first. I understand the Canucks responded, tied it up 1-1 not that long after. But that was an initiation of speed and execution, right? So if you can get the depth scoring, coming from areas like that, then I like the chances of the Oilers advancing to the Western Conference Final. They defended terrifically well in Game 6, so more of that. But you also know that in the Vancouver Canucks, you've got a real well-coached group there. Rick Tocchet has not been afraid to push buttons, not necessarily call guys out, but by committee, saying there were too many passengers, after, what was it, Game 4, Game 5, whatever it was. He didn't say that in Game 6. When you're preparing for a Game 7, the approach has to be different. It's all about positivity, and it's certainly not giving the opponent any bulletin board material going into that Game 7. So I think Edmonton just has to duplicate what they did in Game 6. You know that the Vancouver Canucks are going to throw everything they have at the Oilers, but is that enough? Maybe it isn't enough. When you get Connor McDavid playing the way that he did in Game 6, I thought Draisaitl was really, really good. It just seemed like they layer after layer after layer. That might be enough to beat the best that Vancouver can throw at Edmonton.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Leon Draisaitl's been outstanding once again in the playoffs. He's a big-time playoff performer. You mentioned that Dylan Holloway goal briefly. I mean, Dylan Holloway he's got 3 goals in the playoffs. It's not like he's full-blown John Druce in this thing or anything, but I think he's sort of established himself as a guy that the team can count on heading into next season, and who knows, maybe he's a guy who steps up tonight.
Couldn't agree more. And, I remember having a conversation with one of the coaches for the Oilers just, was it after Game 1, going into Game 1 of Round 1? I don't recall, but asking about Dylan Holloway. And the response that I got back was, oh, boy, he's ready. And he's going to find his way into the lineup because we do have a layer of trust in him. And he's got that well-rounded skill set, right? What he didn't have was playoff experience or that level of confidence to play the way that you need to play in the playoffs. And it appears that now he has that. So I look at the future being incredibly bright. Again, the salary cap is going to manage some of the decisions that Oilers management have to make moving forward. That doesn't change with any of the cap teams. But when you've got a piece like Dylan Holloway, who's proving that he can perform and he can deal with the pressures of the Stanley Cup playoffs, and doesn't that give you a pretty good look at what his future might be long-term in an Oilers uniform? But that's what you need. And, I made a point after Game 6 of talking about the difference in that game. And the score sheet was interesting because there were different contributors to the offense of the Oil. And, aside from the Holloway goal, one of the most impressive goals, fellas, for me, was the Evander Kane goal. And not because Kane scored it. It was because Leon Draisaitl absolutely cleaned JT Miller off that faceoff. You couldn't have won that faceoff any cleaner at any level of hockey. And JT Miller, by his own admission, had a tough game. He did. I mean, he was on the ice for 4 against, but was on the ice for 1-4, the goal they scored. So he was a -3. So to get back to Vancouver a little bit, he's going to be on his game. We know he's the head of the snake for the Vancouver Canucks. So if there's an area that I expect Vancouver to be much improved, it would probably be the Miller line. And I think Edmonton will be ready for that and expecting that.
Darren Dreger with us on the show this morning, brought to you by Pro-Am Sports. Dregs, do you expect the Oilers to just run back what they had in Game 6? Or does the Corey Perry 10 career Game 7s and that experience factor in at all, do you think?
Yeah, I think it has to factor in. Like, are you pulling Carrick out? I guess that
would be the guy. Yeah. I didn't mind him last game, though. But
I didn't mind him either. Yeah. But you know what, bud? With all due respect to Carrick, Corey Perry's just one of those guys. I understand he's been quiet. He has been quiet offensively and otherwise, to this point of the Stanley Cup playoffs. But you look at the rap sheet of Corey Perry and just his knack for doing something special in monumental games, and it's there. I mean, the resume is there. So whether or not they tinker with a winning lineup, I think we could all support why Chris Knoblauch wouldn't, right? In light of how well they played collectively in Game 6. But unless you're a coaching staff that just, admittedly says, no, we don't mess with that. We played so well, we're not going to mess with it. I think we'd all understand and support that. But how can you not have that conversation? Again, given the resume and the history of Corey Perry, if it were me, I'd probably lean to putting him in, to be fair, because he's going to junk it up. He's smart enough to stay disciplined. He's past the point in a playoff game where the wires are going to touch and he's going to do something dumb and, he's going to take a penalty. What he might do in a scrum or an environment like that is take off a real good player with him. Yeah. And then there's a win in that as well. So I'm trying to find out. You can appreciate how those who are making those calls, they got the cards real tight to the vest at this
good
point.
Luck getting that info. Yeah, good luck
getting that info. Yeah. But we're going to try down hard.
Even your best sources, a quick reply. Dregs, really? Come on.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah.
I think I saw your podcast co-host Ferraro tweeting about the officiating in this series at some point, and like both fan bases have been livid with it. So to me, it's kind of just been equally a disaster on both sides, but how do they handle it in a Game 7 here, Darren? Like, do they kind of try to put the whistles away and let them go? Oilers power play 0 for 8 in the last 2 games. So
hasn't been doing much.
I mean, it hasn't really factored in. I feel like if they get some chances tonight, that could end up being a difference. But what are you expecting tonight?
Well, look, I mean, remind me who got the first penalty in Game 6, because it was, we're watching, in our green room at TSN, and we're like, and it was like an interference play in front of the bench.
Pius Suter.
Yeah,
early in the game again, right? Like
45.
And I'm sitting there, and look, Frankie Corrado's in there, and Greg Button, and we're not trying to pile on the officials, but when you call a penalty like that early in the game, guess what you've done? Now you've established the way the game needs to be called, has to get called the rest of the way, and that really was the way it was. I don't know. I mean, at least it was fair for the most part, I think, going both ways. But that's a game that the Vancouver Canucks can't win. So they have to be sensitive to it, right? I mean, if you're going to take penalty after penalty and you're not going to play by the standard that's been established by the crew early in the contest, then you're clearly playing with fire. So, yeah, I mean, but I say this, and it would anger the commissioner of the National Hockey League, probably Stephen Walken, the director of officiating. I think that the officials are keenly aware of what Game 7 means. Like, there's no Game 8. One of these teams is done, and the other one is going to play the Dallas Stars in the Western Conference Final. So be sure that it's a penalty. But there's nothing wrong. Hey, if it looks a little ticky-tacky because someone gets a stick in their hands, they call that all the time. They call it all the time, the hook, the hold, all of that. So no stick penalties, no lazy sort of penalties, none of that. That would be kind of the messaging I'm sure the coaching staff is delivering. But I'm hoping that the officials are also certain it's a penalty when they're making that call because of, what's at stake here going into this one.
Dregs, before I let you go, the winner of tonight's game advances to take on the Dallas Stars, who've eliminated the last two Stanley Cup champions along the way here. Yeah. I mean, that's a tall task no matter who wins Game 7 tonight. Dallas they're so deep. Ottinger's been good. Their blue line with the addition of Tanev,
a couple days off,
is excellent. They're going to have a little bit of rest. That's a monumental task for whoever comes out of this.
Agreed. I was pumping the tires of the Colorado Avalanche going into the Stanley Cup playoffs, and I kind of elevated that chorus, after they eliminated the Winnipeg Jets in round one. The Dallas Stars are a real good team. They're super deep. We could talk for an hour about the fact that they don't appear to have a weakness. You want to start with the obvious. You've got Jake Ottinger, who's lights out good in goal. You've got that defense who can beat you many different ways. Miro Heiskanen, is one of the best in the league. Anyone paying attention with Wyatt Johnson has done to this point, this kid is just flat out nails. He just is, So they've got that unique balance of experience, and special teams battles. They can win those. Physicality, they're not afraid of what they're going to face. They're, in a lot of ways, for me, the Florida Panthers of the West because of the myriad of ways that they can beat you. So I think it's going to be a heck of a series, whether it's Dallas, Edmonton. Look, I'm intrigued. Because I don't know what you guys think here as we wrap up, but I see a higher level of maturity in the game of the Edmonton Oilers right now. I do. And I think that's going to bode well for them tonight in Game 7. But I want to see the next fight here. And if it's McDavid and Draisaitl up against the best of the Dallas Stars, how can we go wrong from an entertainment value in that one? With great respect to the Vancouver Canucks, who could win, of course they are. I'm not disrespecting. It just feels like McDavid and Draisaitl. Somebody said this. I don't know where it was, but I laughed out loud when this person said this going into Game 6 publicly. Well, Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid are going to have to be the best. All right. Okay. I get it. But in fairness, they had a heck of a game. The Oilers maybe aren't as dominant in Game 6 without the heroics of McDavid and Draisaitl. So let's apply that to Game 7 and then look forward to whatever comes our way in the Western Conference Final.
Dregs, when's the next episode of Ray and Dregs Drop?
Yeah, you know what? We dropped one yesterday, just teeing up Game 7. Ray is, as you can appreciate, he's traveling with ESPN. In fact, I think he's doing tonight's game, so not much travel for him in Vancouver. But then he's going to dart over, I believe, to New York and MSG for Game 1 of Florida and the Rangers on Wednesday. So we're hoping he can squeeze 45 minutes out of his busy morning on Wednesday.
All right, man. Well, we'll be watching for that. We'll talk to you next week.